And we are live, ladies and gentlemen. We are live. It is Sunday night. It is Sunday night. And in my slightly chaotic home, I've had a busy day. Many meetings. Had coffee with my brother. Had not seen my brother for a while. It was lovely to see him. Let's see what else. Oh, studio cat Corduroy has taken up her summer bed. Her winter bed is this cat cave. Her summer bed is an open air, very like halfway up bed, and she can curl around in it and she sleeps in it. It's very, very cute, ladies and gentlemen. Very, very cute. Spring is coming. If you're up here, it doesn't really feel like it. It feels like one step forward, two steps back, but we still have wood stove going, and at least one small cat likes wood stove. The other cat, kindly Dr. Charbonneau, is still out on his rounds, which I do not approve of, and he knows darn well that I don't approve of it, and that's why he's still out on his rounds. Hopefully we see him soon. Hopefully we'll see a little figure. There'll be a little jingling sound, and then a little figure will go in there looking for snacks. But until that happens, time for us to thank a few people. Today's Liberal Snowplowing Do-Gooder beneficiary was my very own Rockingham Entertainment Development, because we have many important projects. Many irons in the fire, ladies and gentlemen. Many irons in the fire. Local film festivals, live events, trying to upfit some sound equipment for the theater. There's a big project coming that's going to be a big mess, but we're not going to worry about that. That's not really a Rockingham Entertainment Development project. That's a Bellows Falls Opera House project. But we may do some real redesign on the website, all kinds of stuff. So your dollars are very much appreciated. And there's an unidentified unglet here in a can who wants to thank you. First off, that painter of childhood, that painter of those halcyon days of childhood innocence, Ms. Catherine Fisher. Next, we have the Traveler, Terry the Traveler. That's her hashtag. You go to Instagram. You just type in Terry the Traveler, and there you get Terry the Traveler's Travels. And Amtrak itself follows Terry the Traveler and thanks her for riding with Amtrak. So Terry the Traveler, thank you, Terry Hudson. Whoa, much better. Out there in Omaha, Nebraska, also quite a traveler in his own way. Quite a traveler. Also one of the world's connoisseurs of lobster rolls, Mr. John T. Wilhelm. Oh, the unidentified unglet has some sort of disease tonight. Some sort of anthrax. Oh, not good. Out there in Taos, New Mexico, with her little dog Fergie and her large cat Tess. And Tess keeps Fergie in his place. My good friend, Miss Meg Miser. Down there in Bonneville, Massachusetts, waiting for his new foot to fully reconstruct so he can go out and whack those bears right between the nose. Those bears that come right up to his bird feeders. And they're like, well, here is a perfectly located little feed funnel just waiting for me. Mr. Gary Pierce and his excellent wife, Miss Aline Cortez. Thank you, Gary and Aline. And out there in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, right near Weirton, West Virginia, quite close to the Yogahaney and the Scioto and the Ohio and all those great rivers, ladies and gentlemen. My very, 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 very tall cousin, as great as those great rivers himself. Thank you, Mr. Nat Hunter. his wonderful wife Elise, and their wee little dog Ginger. Thank you, thank you. All right, it is time for the final chapter. The final chapter of James Thurber's My Life in Hard Times. Draft board nights. We're going to have draft board nights, and then there's a little afterwards. We're going to have a little afterwards. Draft board nights. I left the university in June 1918, but I could not get into the Army on account of my sight, just as grandfather couldn't get in on account of his age. He applied several times, and each time he took off his coat and threatened to whip the man who said he was too old. The disappointment of not getting to Germany, he saw no sense in everybody going to France, and the strain of running around town seeing influential officials finally got him down into bed. He had wanted to lead a division, and his chagrin at not even being able to enlist as a private was too much for him. His brother Jake, some 15 years younger than he was, sat up at night with him after he took to bed because we were afraid he might leave the house without even putting on his clothes. Grandfather was against the idea of Jake watching over him. He thought it was a lot of tomfoolery. But Jake had not been able to sleep. Jake had not been able to sleep at night for 28 years, so he was the perfect person for such a vigil. On the third night, grandfather was wakeful. He would open his eyes, look at Jake, close them again, frowning. He never answered any question that Jake asked him. About 4 o'clock that morning, he caught his brother sound asleep in the big leather chair beside the bed. When once Jake did fall asleep, he slept deeply, so that grandfather was able to get up, dress himself, undress Jake, and put him to bed without waking him. When my Aunt Florence came into the room at 7 o'clock, grandfather was sitting in the chair reading the memoirs of U.S. Grant, and Jake was sleeping in the bed. He watched while I slept, said grandfather. So now I'm watching while he sleeps. That seemed fair enough. One reason we did not want grandfather to roam around at night was that he had said something once or twice about going over to Lancaster, his old hometown, and putting his problem up to Cump. I'm going to reread that sentence. Going over to Lancaster, his old hometown, and putting his problem up to Cump, that is, William Tecumseh Sherman, an old Lancaster boy. We knew that his inability to find Sherman would be bad for him, and we were afraid that he might try to get there in the little electric roundabout that had been bought for my grandmother. She had become, surprisingly enough, quite skillful at getting around town in it. Grandfather was astonished and a little indignant when he saw her get into the contraption and drive off smoothly and easily. It was her first vehicular triumph over him in almost 50 years of married life, and he determined to learn to drive the thing himself. A famous old horseman, he approached it as he might have approached a wild colt. His brow would darken, and he would begin to curse. He always leapt into it quickly. As if it might pull out from under him if he did not get into the seat fast enough. The first few times he tried to run the electric, he went swiftly around in a small circle, drove over the curb, across the sidewalk, and up onto the lawn. We all tried to persuade him to give it up, but his spirit was aroused. Get that goddamned buggy back on the road, he would say imperiously. So we'd maneuver it back into the street and he'd try again. Pulling too savagely on the guiding bar to teach the electric a lesson, was what took him around in a circle. And it was difficult to make him understand that it was best to relax and to not get mad. He had the notion that if you did not hold her, she would throw you. And a man who, or so as he often told us, had driven a 4-horse McCormick Reaper when he was 5 years old, did not intend to be thrown by an electric runabout. Since there was no way of getting him to give up learning to operate the electric, we would take him out to Franklin Park, where the roadways were wide and unfrequented, and spend an hour or so trying to explain the differences between driving a horse and carriage and driving an electric. He would keep muttering all the time. He never got it out of his head that when he took the driver's seat, the machine flattened its ears on him, so to speak. After a few weeks, nevertheless, he got so he could run the electric for 100 yards or so along a fairly straight line. But whenever he took a curve, he invariably pulled or pushed the bar too quickly and too hard and headed for a tree or for a flower bed. Someone was always with him, and we would never let him take the car out of the park. One morning, when grandmother was all ready to go to market, she called the garage and told them to send the electric around. They said that grandfather had already been there and had taken it out. There was a tremendous to-do. We telephoned Uncle Will, and he got out his Lozier, and we started off to hunt for grandfather. It was not yet 7 o'clock, and there was fortunately little traffic. We headed for Franklin Park, figuring that he might have gone out there to try to break the car's spirit. Yorkie is sneezing over there. Yorkie, you okay? Yeah, she's okay. We headed for Franklin Park, figuring he might have gone out there to try to break the car's spirit. One or two early pedestrians had seen a tall old gentleman with a white beard driving a little electric and cussing as he drove. We followed a tortuous trail and found them finally on Nelson Road, about 4 miles from the town of Shepherd. Grandfather was standing in the road shouting, and the back wheels of the electric were deeply entangled in a barbed wire fence. 2 workmen and a farmhand were trying to get the thing loose. Grandfather was in a state of high wrath about the electric. The son of a bitch backed up on me, he said. But to get back to the war, the Columbus Draft Board never called grandfather for service, which was a lucky thing for them because they would have had to take him. There were stories of several old men of 80 or 90 that had been summoned in the confusion. But somehow or other, grandfather was missed. He waited every day for the call, but it never came. My own experience, however, was quite different. I was called almost every week, even though I had been exempted from service the first time I went before the medical examiners. Either they were never convinced that it was me, or else there was some clerical error in the records which was never cleared up. Anyway, there was usually a letter for me on Monday ordering me to report for examination on the 2nd floor of Memorial Hall the following Wednesday at 9 p.m. The second time I went up, I tried to explain to one of the doctors that I had already been exempted. "You're just a blur to me," I said, taking off my glasses. "Well, you're absolutely nothing to me," he snapped sharply. I had to take off all my clothes each time and jog around the hall with a lot of porters and bank presidents' sons and clerks and poets. Our hearts and lungs would be examined, and then our feet, and finally our eyes. That always came last. When the eye specialist got around to me, he would always say, "Why, you couldn't get into the service with sight like that." "I know," I would say. Then, a week or two later, I'd be summoned again and go through the same rigmarole. The 9th or 10th time that I was called, I happened to pick up one of several stethoscopes that were lying on a table. And suddenly, instead of finding myself in the line of draftmen, I found myself in the line of examiners. "Hello, doctor," one of them said, nodding. "Hello," I said. That, of course, was before I took my clothes off. I might have managed it naked, but I doubt it. I was assigned, or rather, I drifted over to the chest and lung section, where I began to examine every other man, thus cutting old Dr. Ridgway's work in two. "Well, I'm glad to have you here, doctor," he said. I passed most of the men that came to me, but now and then I would exempt one just to be on the safe side. I began by making each of them hold his breath and then say, "Me, me, me, me," until I noticed Ridgway looking at me curiously. He, I discovered, simply made them say, "Ah," and sometimes he didn't make them say anything. Once, I got hold of a man who, it came out later, had swallowed a watch to make the doctors believe there was something wrong with him inside. It was a common subterfuge. Men swallowed nails, hairpins, ink, etc., in an effort to be let out. Since I didn't know what you were supposed to hear through a stethoscope, the ticking of the watch at first did not surprise me, but I decided to call Dr. Ridgway into consultation because nobody else had ticked. "This man seems to tick," I said to him. He looked at me in surprise, but he did not say anything. Then he thumped the man, laid his ear to his chest, and finally tried the stethoscope. "Sound as a dollar," he said. "Listen lower down." "Oh, sound as a dollar," he said. "Listen lower down," I said. The man indicated his stomach. Ridgway gave him a haughty, indignant look. "That is for the abdominal men to worry about," he said, and moved off. A few minutes later, Dr. Blythe Bellamy got around to the man and listened, but he did not blink an eye. His grim expression never changed. "You have swallowed a watch, my man," he said crisply. The draftee reddened in embarrassment and uncertainty. "On purpose?" he asked. "That I can't say," the doctor said, and went on. I served with the draft board for about 4 months. Until the summonses ceased, I couldn't leave town, and as long as I stayed and appeared promptly for examination, even though I was doing the examining, I felt that technically I could not be convicted of evasion. During the daytime, I worked as a publicity agent for an amusement park, the manager of which was a tall, unexpected young man named Byron Landis. Some years before, he had dynamited the men's lounge in the State House. The men's lounge in the State House Annex as a prank. He enjoyed pouring buckets of water on sleeping persons, and once he had barely escaped arrest for jumping off the top of the old Columbus Transfer Company building with a homemade parachute. He asked me one morning if I would like to take a ride in the new Scarlet Tornado, a steep and very wavy roller coaster. I did not want to, but I was afraid he would think I was afraid, so I went along. It was about 10 o'clock, and there was nobody at the park except workmen and attendants and concessionaires in their shirt sleeves. We climbed into one of the long gondolas of the roller coaster, and while I was looking around for the man who was going to run it, we began to move off. Landis, I discovered, was running it himself, but it was too late to get out. We had begun to climb clickety-clackety up the first steep incline, down the other side of which we careened at 80 miles an hour. "I didn't know you could run this thing," I bawled at my companion as we catapulted up a 60-degree arch and looped headlong into space. "I didn't either," he bawled back. The racket and the rush of air were terrific as we roared into the pitch-black cave of darkness and came out and down Monahan's Leap, so called because a workman named Monahan had been forced to jump from it when caught between two approaching experimental cars while it was being completed. That trip, although it ended safely, made a lasting impression on me. It is not too much to say that it has flavored my life. It is the reason I shout in my sleep, refuse to ride on the elevated, keep jerking the emergency brake in cars that other people are driving, have the sensation of flying like a bird when I first lie down, and in certain months cannot keep anything on my stomach. During my last few trips to the draft board, I went again as a draft prospect, having grown tired of being an examiner. None of the doctors who had been my colleagues for so long recognized me, not even Dr. Ridgway. When he examined my chest for the last time, I asked him if there hadn't been another doctor helping him. He said there had been. Did he look anything like me? I asked. Dr. Ridgway looked at me. I don't think so, he said. He was taller. I had my shoes off while he was examining me. He was a good pulmonary man, Ridgway said. Relative of yours? I said yes. He sent me on to Dr. Quimby, the specialist who had examined my eyes 12 or 15 times before. He gave me some simple reading tests. You could never get into the service with our eyes like that, he said. I know, I told him. Late one morning, shortly after my last examination, I was awakened by the sound of bells ringing and whistles blowing. It grew louder and more insistent and wilder. It was the armistice. A note at the end. The hard times of my middle years I pass over, leaving the ringing bells of 1918 with all their false promise to mark the end of a special sequence. The sharp edges of old reticences are softened in the autobiographer by the passing of time. A man does not pull the pillow over his head when he wakes in the morning because he suddenly remembers some awful thing that happened to him 15 or 20 years ago. But the confusions and the panics of last year and the year before are too close for comfort. Until a man can quit talking loudly to himself in order to shout down the memories of blunderings and gropings, he is in no shape for the painstaking examinations of distress and the careful ordering of events so necessary to a calm and balanced exposition of what exactly had been the matter. The time I fell out of the gun room in Mr. James Stanley's house in Green Lake, New York, is, for instance, much too near for me to go into with any peace of mind, although it happened in 1925, the ill-fated year of horses, 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 and Valencia. There is now, I understand, a porch to walk out onto when you open that door that I opened that night, but there was not then. The mistaken exits and entrances of my 30s have moved me several times to some thought of spending the rest of my days wandering aimlessly around the South Seas like a character out of Conrad, silent and inscrutable. But the necessity for frequent visits to my oculist and to my dentist have prevented this. You can't be running back from Singapore every few months to get your lenses changed and still retain the proper mood for wandering. Furthermore, my horn-rimmed glasses and my Ohio accent betray me even when I sit on the terraces of little tropical cafes wearing a pith helmet, staring straight ahead and twitching a muscle in my jaw. I found this out when I tried wandering around the West Indies one summer. Instead of being followed by the whispers of men and the glances of women, I was followed by bead salesmen and native women with postcards. Nor did any dark girl looking at all like Tondileo in white cargo come forward and offer to go to pieces with me. They tried to sell me baskets. Under, under these circumstances, it is impossible to be inscrutable and a wanderer. Under these circumstances, it is impossible to be inscrutable. And a wanderer who is not inscrutable might as well just be back at Broad and High Streets in Columbus, sitting at the Baltimore Dairy Lunch. Nobody from Columbus has ever made a first-rate wanderer in the Conradian tradition. Some of them have been fairly good at disappearing for a few days to turn up in a hotel in Louisville with a bad headache and no recollection of how they got there. But they always scurry back to their wives with some cock and bull story of having lost their memory or having gone away to attend the annual convention of the Fraternal Order of the Eagles. There was, of course, even for Conrad's Lord Jim, no running away. The cloud of his special discomfiture followed him like a pup, no matter what ships he took or what wilderness he entered. In the pathways between office and home in the houses of settled people, there are always ready to snap at you the little perils of routine living, but there's no escape in the unplanned tangent, the sudden turn. In Martinique, when the whistle blew for the tourists to get back onto the ship, I had a quick, wild, and a lovely moment when I decided I would not get back on the ship. I did, though, and I found that somebody had stolen the pants to my dinner jacket. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for the annual reading of My Life in Hard Times by James Thurber. Next week, we'll be back with I believe, Robert Benchley, unless some, I have some visitation and some deep, brilliant idea. But come back next week. We'll see what happens. Thank you for joining us. You take good care. You take good care. And we'll see you next Sunday. Bye-bye.